I'm making the title of this video, "Are you sure, Reverend Theresa? Are you sure ableism is a problem?" Because I know that there are probably some people who still want to know more. Like, there are reasons you're not sure, and you want to think about it with information. So if that's you, if you're open to the possibility of learning more, then this video is for you. The first thing we should talk about is, what is ableism? Ableism is a bias. It's a way that oppression happens, and the spectrum that it's on is comparing able bodies with disabled bodies. What ableism says is that able bodies are great and disabled bodies are not great. Is this true? Well, that's a complicated question, but I can tell you two ways of thinking of it. One is that for many disabled people, they experience challenges. You experience challenges in an able body, right? You get the flu, you get a cold. It's not the same thing. And it helps us think about what makes a body good or bad. One of the things I would say is that we can't say people's bodies are bad unless we live in them. And because one of our possibilities is to show gratitude and love for each person who exists, the quality of their body isn't something that we need to debate. Our responsibility as beloved community isn't to identify the good bodies and the bad bodies. It's to create a space of love for every body. See how that works? And then we can build from there. So far, we've talked about how ableism is a bias, and how one of our responsibilities in beloved community is to create space for bodies. I'm going to stop here and say the thing I haven't said yet, and that is that it's not up to us to tell whether people's bodies are good or bad, but in fact, being disabled is not just a shame or a disappointment or a hard thing. It's also just how some people come factory installed. So what I would say is that being disabled is just another way of having a body. And I'm gonna put that here for you. That brings us to consideration of this question. What does the existence of bias have to do with the words of songs we sing or names of organizations? Just as two examples. This is a two-part answer. Are you ready? The first part is that whatever we're doing in services needs to be representative. One way that people are used to thinking of liturgy in services is as the work of the people. And whether or not that's precisely accurate, the shared aspect of a service is really important. One thing I would say is that when we give no consideration to the disabled people in our services, then we're not doing that shared work as well as we could be. People with disabilities are a consistent 10% of any population. So that's something for us to remember as we talk about this. It matters that we give a wide representation to people who are sitting in chairs in our pews, with walkers in our pews, using the hearing loop, using large print, using braille, all the different ways that are possible to participate in our congregations matter, and they're worthy of including in the liturgy of our movement. Sometimes when we get to this point, people say to me, "Reverend Theresa, I don't know what the fuss is about. I'm disabled, and ableist language doesn't bother me." All right, I'd like to discuss that for just a moment. And I want to remind you at the outset that I'm super clear that lots of different people can have lots of different opinions. What I want to talk about is this one for a second. When people say to me that they're disabled and not offended, I have an answer that's good. The point isn't for you to be offended. Ableism is an actual bias that elevates able bodies as good and diminishes disabled bodies as bad. If that doesn't offend you, that's fine, as long as you can pick it out, recognize it, reduce it, represent yourself. Those are the things. Do I need to be offended to work for better and hope for better? Being offended isn't really the point of this consideration. I think, though, that one of the things that doesn't get thought about enough is the way that even though disabled people are 10% of any group, their representation might be low, whether that's in liturgy, in leadership, in presence. And then our question is why? If people that we love, our family and friends, are disabled and they're not represented and not included, why not? One of the questions that's follow-up to this is going to be our next point. Sometimes people say, "But Reverend Theresa, why do you worry about the words when you could worry about access?" Interestingly, there's one kind of ableism that we should be able to agree on. It's the kind that says that some people's bodies are okay to use for negative metaphors. And what I mean by agree on it is agree that we can do better by people than using their bodies as a dumping ground for negative feelings and connections. Another example of this would be, "I was blind, but now I see," to mean a spiritual or ethical conversion. Your beloveds who have visual impairments are probably not going to fight you about this. And the question I would like you to ask yourself is if you're demonstrating a bias. And if that bias is so important to you that you would rather keep it than consider it flexible. It's easy to think of things as no harm, no foul. But one downside that's more difficult to notice, unless we do it on purpose, is the fact that assuming that people aren't going to be offended and that's how you keep your bias in place, it keeps us from actually celebrating and connecting with part of our diversity. In this case, blind people do see, even when they see differently, or use tools that people who only use their eyes don't use. In the description of this video, I'm putting several links for people who want to take their time and read things and think about them, but also a specific video about how blind people see beauty and how assuming that they don't is elevating able-bodied function and diminishing different function. It turns out that access and words that represent people with disabilities create each other. Their existence is connected. Rachel Cohen-Rottenberg speaks to the complexity of the language problem. She says, when a critique of language that makes reference to disability is not welcome. It is nearly inevitable that as a disabled person, I am not welcome either. I'm joined by my spokes dog right now, and we want to wrap up this video by letting you know that this is really the crux of the conversation. So we know that bias is an issue. I'm hoping that people can get with the idea that using disability as a construct to say something is bad is a rude way to talk about someone's body. That's one of the things that I'm not sure if people have completely thought about with regard to what we used to have, standing on the side of love. That particular name didn't leave space for my ancestors in activism who used their disabled bodies to fight for disability justice. Can this activism, this seated activism, be part of what we're talking about when we talk about siding with love? I think so. And I'm wondering how else we can choose to expand.